Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of That Solo Life, the podcast for PR pros and marketers who work for themselves. I am Michelle Kane. My company is Voice Matters, and I am here as ever with Karen Swim of Solo PR Pro. Hi, Karen. How are you today?
Hi, Michelle. I think, like everybody else, surviving.
Yes, indeed.
You know that term, faking it until you make it? I
Oh,
think
yeah.
I'm
Yes,
there.
yes,
Trying to
yes.
overcome the saltiness of the season.
Oh, it's a lot of salt. And yeah, it's not good for our blood pressure, not at all. And we're not talking about food. And if you're a PR pro, you're nodding your head in agreement because Karen and I were speaking off air. It's not just us, because I've been speaking with other fellow colleagues, and it seems like everyone. It's just like all the challenging people are coming out of the woodwork at one time, and it's not even entirely related to like actual real work. It's just blah. Anyway, we're hoping
Let's
we are
call this
recording
the
this.
PR full moon, or,
Yes, it's a PR full moon.
it's the PR full moon where it's just like, oh my goodness. And
Oh,
we know that we're not the only ones that
no.
are feeling like all of a sudden all of your peace has been upended and people are just
Yes.
really
Yes.
unhinged.
Yes. So, and I say this every time there's a Mercury retrograde that I don't live by that, but I'm telling you, June 3rd cannot come fast enough. And if you're listening to this in the cast, June 3rd is come and gone. And let's hope the air and people's minds are a lot clearer by then. That would be
Let's hope.
nice.
That
It
would
would be
be
super.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So we started off a little light, but we're not going to keep it light because today we are going to talk about having your act together when it comes to crisis comm. Because have we seen, unfortunately, in recent events, looking at you, Texas, not having your act together in a crisis, not presenting clear information confidently with clarity, and the truth will come to haunt you. So, as PR pros, we're on the front lines of that. So we just want to talk about that a little bit today about, making sure you're ready. And, I don't care who you are or who you're working with, you need to have some sort of a crisis plan in place. Ideally, you have a plan for different scenarios, you work the plan, you practice the plan, all that good stuff. But at
Yeah.
the very least, have at least a 5-point plan and a spokesperson ready. But so we're gonna riff a little bit about that
Yeah.
today.
And I think it's particularly challenging in when you have events like natural disasters or, mass
Yeah.
violence, because you're not only dealing with crisis, you're dealing with the loss of life. And
Yes.
you're a human being. And even, first responders have a tough time in these situations when you're faced with that kind of devastation. So you're having to manage your own emotions as well as make sure that you're covering all the bases. And I think, one of the things that stuck out to me, because this was something that some of our PR pros were discussing, is that crisis takes on a whole new level in these situations where your publics also need to be managed and you're sort of managing the response to the publics that are impacted. So you're looking at things like, families of victims may have their own spokespeople. You certainly cannot control families speaking to the media. And, you're just coordinating with so many different agencies. So in education, we know that you have your crisis communications plan, but then there's also a separate crisis plan that you need to align with for the school, the district, that's usually directed at a higher level. So, they have to coordinate the resources, but you need to understand who all the point people are. And as Michelle said, even when you're just in charge of the crisis communications plan, we can't emphasize enough in times of non-crisis, you need to be practicing these scenarios. You need to meet routinely. You need to check your plans. You need to update information, update spokespeople, make sure that you have accurate phone numbers. What's the phone tree look like, or the email tree for getting through to people? What's the backup if Wi-Fi is down in the area and power is out? Because, in a natural disaster, you can't just call people and you might not be able to email them. So practice all of those scenarios and also learn from what's going on in other areas. So that's important too. If something has happened, what went well, what were the gaps that you saw? What can you learn from that so that you can evolve and adapt your crisis plan, because we all know as PR pros that a crisis plan is not something that you develop and stick it on a shelf and let it gather dust. It's something that's a living, breathing document that's dynamic.
Yeah, agree. And, clearly a crisis is a crisis. Things aren't going according to your stated timetable. Things are happening quickly. And one thing to remember above all else is it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay for your spokesperson to say, I don't know. It is better to wait and get it right than to put information out that is incorrect because A, it's just wrong, not a good practice. And B, then you'll find yourself correcting information, which just creates more confusion.
Yeah.
And what crisis have you been involved with that hasn't been confusing as its own, its very nature, right? So you want to
Yeah.
cut through any of that clutter. It's okay to say, I don't know, and get the right information when you are able to do so. I get it. People with deadlines
Yeah.
aren't going to like that so much, but they can just report that you don't know and that you're being careful and cautious, which in
But
and of
this is
itself is a
where,
good message to send.
yes, and this is where holding statements are your best friend. Your crisis plan should have holding statements for every scenario, because a holding statement is giving some information as you know it and as the situation is unfolding. So it allows you to speak to the media and satisfy that urgent need of they need to hear something from you without giving inaccurate information. So as Michelle said, you don't want to just not give a statement or no comment at this time, but you can say something like, we are aware of the situation,
Right.
and our hearts go out to those who have been affected by this crisis. We are, cooperating with the authorities and first responders, whatever it may be. And as we have more information, we will definitely share it with the public. I mean, that's saying something. So have those holding statements. Make sure that your spokespeople know those holding statements and know how to access them quickly in a crisis. I always see crisis as, a dance, when it's go time and it's time to, when you practice a dance over and over and over and over again, and it becomes muscle memory. When it's time to spring into action, you don't have to think about it. You know it. And so you are responsible for helping your clients to get to that point with crisis plans where they don't have to think about it. Because, in situations like the horrible situation in Texas with children and families, imagine scrambling in the midst of that to try to figure out what you're supposed to be doing and who's on first. It's impossible. You can't. You need to have a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
And we saw that maybe this wasn't a well-oiled machine in a lot of ways.
No. And that brings another point to mind. As much as you can, so, if we're speaking specifically about a school district, you liaise with local law enforcement on many levels. So, whether it's that type of situation, whether it's a municipal situation, you want to make sure that you get buy-in from everyone. Not necessarily that you're controlling what another agency says, but that you check in with each other and say, look, if something goes down, we're going to need to know who your point person is. We need to know what your practices are with this, because this is our plan. You really need to meet with those fellow stakeholders for any given scenario. And this is where we are. Here we are. We're the rain clouds coming in, the PR people, but we're trying to help you not get wet when something like this happens. So we try and think of all the things.
I love that analogy. And, again, in this specific situation and situations like this, the other thing you're dealing with are things that you might not think about in terms of your crisis response. For example, when a tragedy happens and lives are lost like this, people will often come to the site of the tragedy and they will leave memorial items for the victims to show that they care. Those could be photographs, they could be stuffed animals, they could be flowers. All of those things need to be taken care of at some point. You can't leave them at the site forever. So your crisis plan should address how you will handle memorial items. You need to inventory them. If there are things that can be given to the families, or if you want to gather all of those things in a place and maybe you want to do a memorial for all of the victims. So maybe that's a, display case that lives at the site of all of the items. But think through that. And obviously you want to communicate to the family what's happening with the items and get their consent. So again, there's, more complex layers, and in all of this as a PR person, you're also dealing with emotions. And that can be really difficult. Again, you're managing your own, but you're also having in some ways have to deal with families who are grieving and in the moment of this. And so, make sure that you address all of those things that could happen in that scenario too, so that you're prepared.
Yeah, agree. I agree. And, yeah, and clearly with something as large as that, they're getting inquiries from all over for all things. So, really getting things in writing as quickly as possible, as succinctly as possible, making sure that all interested parties have access to these updates, whether that's a newsroom page on your website that you flip a switch on, have those landing pages ready to go. They don't have to be beautiful. They just have to be functional, because you want to give everyone an easy space to get the latest updates, because you're not going to be at a podium every 5 minutes. And also, something to keep in mind, to have your experts on hand. If you have experts that can lend information to what is happening, whether it's grief counselors or a geologic expert, depending on what your crisis is. um,
Yes.
make sure you have your allies lined up in advance, just in case you need their expertise to help further clarify whatever is going on.
It can also help, when you said geological, because, yeah, natural disasters. I was still living in Southern California when we had the big earthquake that collapsed freeways and destroyed entire neighborhoods. And one of the things that was helpful was not only having a place to go for credible information about the infrastructure, areas to avoid, and what to do, because in that situation, you're like, wait, the what freeway like completely crashed in, and you're not sure, but ways to help. And so, in these crises, think about that as well, that, helping to get information out quickly about, people often want to dive in and they want to help. If there's, a tornado, if there, is a widespread power outage, people, from neighboring communities that aren't affected want to know, how can I help? What can I do? Or even people from, far away. With the recent grocery store shootings, people from across the country wanted to know, how to donate. And there were just so many efforts, which I would say, if there's any way that you can streamline that and share information upfront with families about maybe coordinating together to make it easier for people to support them, that's always a good idea, rather than having, 22 individual efforts going on. So yeah, there's just a lot of details to really think through, which is why it's important to watch, other crises when they come up, learn from them.
Yeah.
And then we have solo PR pros that are experts in this area. And I don't mean to leave anyone out, but two that readily come to mind: Fran Stephenson. And if you go to her, and it's Steps in Communication, is her business.
Step in PR. Yeah.
Step in Communications, Fran Stephenson, and it's PH, STEPHEN.
We'll put her in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. Fran has excellent resources on her site about, little tips and checklists and templates. And, if you ever find yourself in need of a crisis counselor, reach out to her, because she does, this is her job. She's a PR pro. She's accredited. She's very smart, very good. I've worked with her. And you can bring her in to consult on crises. The other person that is always top of mind is Doug Levy. And Doug has a great book about crisis communications that you can find on Amazon. I'm sure you can find it on his website as well. But his book is really good. And it also delves into crisis. And some of the things that he details are natural disasters. And so, again, learn from other professionals who do this. Even if you are someone who does crisis, I also do some crisis work, but here's the thing: I don't do crisis work every day of the week. Some people may be dedicated to that specialty. So they're handling more crises per year than the rest of us who understand it, do it, and incorporate it into our practice. I'm not dealing with crises every day of the week. That's not my whole work. So
sometimes it feels like we do, but
sometimes, yeah. Sometimes being in PR is a whole crisis of another ilk daily.
Well, we mean real
But
crises, yeah.
yeah, don't be afraid to tap into experts and keep your knowledge level fresh. And if you find yourself in a situation, and hopefully you'll be pre-planning before your clients ever get there and
Yes.
practicing. And then if you see something bubbling early on, I would definitely try to nip it in the bud before it goes wide. And so understand how to spot those triggers and have some processes for escalation. But there are things that we can't plan. We can't plan the timing for, but we can plan ahead for. You can't know when a church is going to be attacked or a school is going to be attacked, or when, I mean, we know when, an earthquake may hit, and we may know when a tornado's headed our way. But again, those are things that are in the moment for the most part, but you can have a plan to deal with it. So better safe than sorry. And I know all PR pros know that. And I know sometimes clients want to blow it off. They don't want to take the time and work to create a crisis communications plan because there's not an immediate crisis. And I always tell people it's far better, protects your reputation and protects your business, and also is a lot less costly to you on every front to plan in advance for all the things that could go wrong than to bring me in after it's already happened, because then it's already too late.
Yeah.
You're not
And
planning, you're responding, and you're being reactive, and things are going to go wrong.
you never want to be operating from a point of reactivity. And, as crises are in the moment, so is social media. And that has been a game changer for managing crises. I mean, it's depending on the size of your organization or the size of the crises, you really almost want to plan to have someone who's focused only on Twitter, only on Facebook. I mean, it can be good, helps you get information out. So I'm not talking about always just being on defense, but being on the offense, saying, yes, we're going to have updates to our Twitter feed. We have someone there. So if you DM us, if you need specific
Yes.
information, we are going to be broadcasting our updates live on our Facebook page. Or, if your audience is on Instagram, sure, use that too. Use the channels that you have built to help you get the information out. And also because we have seen how fast misinformation gets spread around just with this, the shooting in Texas alone, how
Yeah.
misinformation gets spread. So you really have to be as on top of it as possible, as proactive as possible. So you own the narrative as much as you can control. You can't control the event, but you can control the information that you give and how you give it.
Yeah, and that just brought to mind, we're going to try to share some resources in the show notes, but if it's something in your local community, don't forget the Nextdoor app, which we love to, hate on, but the Nextdoor app is another good way to get out information in a crisis to the local community. And I know sometimes we forget about that because we think about all of the big social media channels and we forget about those local individual efforts.
Right.
That it is helpful. I myself have found out about things that are going on in the neighborhood, and through the Nextdoor app, that's one of the great uses of it. So don't forget about that as well.
Yeah. I don't know. Is the number one question asked in your Nextdoor groups? What was that loud noise I heard at 2 a.m.? Everyone's hearing loud bangs.
Everyone's hearing loud bangs. Or I thought there might have been maybe possibly an accident. What happened at the corner of, there's always those questions. What was the noise? Hey, what was happening at the corner of blah, blah, blah at this time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, but no, it's so true. Use your hyper local means if it's
Yes.
appropriate, because that's what they are there for, really. And that is, where people will be looking for information from you. Well, we hope in this short time that we've given you a good old pep talk about getting a crisis plan together if you have not done so, because it is important. You always want to be ahead of the game. And, our job is to champion and, have our clients' backs. And this is a very important way to do so. So we thank you for joining us. We hope you've gotten something out of this time together. And until next time, thanks for listening to That Solo Life.